This is Rachel. Rachel is a science teacher and she is fed up. This is wrong.
站在这边。你告诉我几时开始就可以了。Hi, good morning, everyone. For those who are in person, on behalf of North Toronto Chinese Baptist Church and the Ontario Chinese Christian Medical Fellowship, we welcome you to attend this morning's Understanding E-Addictions Among Young People, the workshop. So I'd like to welcome you. For those people who are online, we also welcome you as well. We'll say hello to you. And before we start today's workshop, I would like to have a quick opening prayer, and I will introduce the speaker today, and we will start our workshop immediately. So let's have a quick word of prayer. God, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the beautiful day that you're given us. We pray that as we gather together to listen to the speakers, for their words, for their encouragement, and God, we pray that you will speak to individual hearts and mind and soul, and pray that we'll be able to learn, we're able to share our experience so that we can be encouraged for the topic that we are dealing with today. And God, we just pray that you be with us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Today we have our three speakers. I will introduce the speakers in alphabetical orders because they're all very close in names. The first speaker is Dr. Michael Perry. He's the primary care medical psychotherapist. He has a long credentials. And Dr. Perry has several credentials in psychotherapy. He's a certified in interpersonal psychotherapy and also certified in group psychotherapy. And he's the chair of OMA sections of primary care mental health and also the coordinators of medical clinic for person-centered psychotherapy. And Dr. Perry also has a special interest in the foundations and the fundamentals of clinical practice, including the ethics of practice, privacy, and confidentiality, and keeping good professional boundaries, provide informed consent to treatment, adequate record keeping, psychotherapist competencies, and also the standard of care in the provisions of competence and compassion care. And most importantly, Dr. Michael Perry is also a Christian, and he loves God. And the second speaker today is also Michael, but it's Michael Park. Just a couple letter difference. That's why it's in alphabetical orders. And Michael Park has a triple bachelor degree in sociology, in human services, and social work, and is currently pursuing a Master of Theology study in Tyndale Seminary. And Michael is a social worker and has clinical experience in behavioral and rehabilitation therapy. And he chose to openly discuss his previous addictive gaming behaviors and his recovery process as a way to coach and mentor others. He is married with 2 children and is expecting a third. The third already came in July. He was expecting a third in July, so this is September. So my notes is a bit outdated. But yeah, thank God for him. And our third speaker will be Bo-Yang Qing. And Bo-Yang is the vice chair of the Mandarin Ministry Group at Ntcbc, and is a software developer at work, and is married with 1 child. So we'd like to welcome all three speakers and all of you again for today's workshop. And we'll start with the workshop with a sharing from Bo-Yang. He will share with us about his experience. Welcome, Bo-Yang.
Thank you, Deacon Kai. I'll be sharing my testimony in both Mandarin and English. 大家好，我是博洋，我出生在中国的东北，在15岁那一年呢，随着父母移民来到了加拿大，到今天呢已经26年了。Hello everyone, my name is Bo Yang. I grew up in China I immigrated to Canada with my parents when I was 15 years old, and that was 26 years ago. 我是一个学霸，至少在初中以后和上大学之前，我是一个学霸。凭借自己的聪明和努力，成绩名列前茅对我来说不是一件很难的事情。I had always been a good student, at least in my junior and senior high school years. I was a smart kid. Not the smartest, but a smart kid nonetheless. I studied hard, really hard, and I almost ranked always first in my class and regularly top 5 across my grade. 这一切呢，在我来到加拿大以后发生了很大的变化。来加拿大之前的3年，我在外婆家。那个时候呢，我的父母已经来到了北美。来到加拿大以后呢，我发现了一个好东西，就是电脑游戏。这个好玩啊！加拿大中学学习的这种强度呢，比起国内来说要简单得多。Things started to change after coming to Canada. At the time, I have been away from my parents for the past 3 years. Coming to a new country, having to make new friends, as a teenager, I discovered this wonderful thing, computer games. It was fun. Academically, compared to the intensity back in China, high school in Canada was easy. 大学之前，我还住在家里面，父母很不喜欢我打游戏，他们会把我赶出去打篮球。I was still living at home at that time. My parents hated seeing me playing games. They would kick me out of the room and go play basketball outside. 3年之后呢，我进入了滑铁卢大学学习工程。更重要的是呢，那里离我父母所在的渥太华有5个小时的距离。这下没有人管我喽。在这段时间里，我没日没夜的在打游戏。在其他同学学习的时候，我在打游戏；在他们睡觉的时候，我在打游戏。在他们吃饭的时候，对了，我还在打游戏，可以说是在用我的实际行动来诠释什么是废寝忘食。今天我的体重有差不多165磅，在大一的时候130磅，在短短的1个月的时间内，我又减了20磅。I studied engineering at the University of Waterloo, 5 hours away from Ottawa, where my parents lived. Nobody's gonna stop me now. I played day and night. When my classmates were studying, I was playing. When they were sleeping, I was playing. When they were in class, I was playing. I weigh about 165 pounds today. In year 1, 130. Within 1 month of university, I dropped another 20 pounds. 体重上迅速的变化给我敲响了警钟，于是我调整了自己的作息，那就是什么呢？在其他同学上课的时候，我睡觉。大学1年级的时候呢，我的平均分还勉强可以坚持在80分左右。This rang an alarm bell. I realized I cannot continue this way. I have to make some adjustments, which is to sleep when my classmates are in school. I still managed to average 80% in year 1. 2年级的时候呢，就不一样了。我第一次挂科，而且是我最擅长的高数3。这个学期我的平均分是59.5。基于之前我的成绩还可以，学校四舍五入，让我以60分的成绩进入了2年级。2A though was a completely different story. I failed the course for the first time, Calculus 3. My mark was 39. Math had always been my strongest subject. That term I averaged 59.5, which the school decided to round up to 60, allowing me to continue to 2B. 直到这个时候呢，我的内心才有一种羞愧感，对不起家人对我的期望，对不起抚养我的父母， 和他们辛苦挣来的学费。但是呢，我又没有办法来控制我自己，终日生活在罪里，十分的痛苦。Only then I felt guilty. Both of my parents worked in labor jobs to pay for my tuition. I had let them down. But at the same time, I just couldn't control myself. Rather, I was controlled by those games. I was in pain, embarrassed, but at the same time, tired and sleepy from playing those games. But I just couldn't stop. 作为一个从小娇生惯养的80后，由于学习成绩基本上没有遇到过什么问题，而神的计划它就是这么的奇妙，凭借着这样一个苦难，打开了我的眼睛。在朋友的介绍下，我开始参加滑铁卢大学国语团契的聚会，在那里呢，神的话进入了我的心中。Being the only child from China, and because I had always been a good student, at that age, I never had any real setbacks. God's plan is amazing. He opened my eyes through this. And through a friend, I started attending the Mandarin Fellowship at the university. And from there, God's words entered my heart. 圣经有一句话是这样讲的：你们得救是本乎恩，也因着信。这不是出于自己，乃是神所赐；也不是出于行为，免得有人自夸。A verse from the Bible says, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." 是主耶稣让我看到了自己的罪，并且凭靠自己是无法摆脱罪的捆绑的，唯有来到神的面前，承认自己的罪，求慈爱的神赦免我，并接受他成为我生命的主宰，才能摆脱罪的捆绑。It is through God I was able to see my sins and cannot break loose from it on my own. The only way was to come to God, confess my sins, and ask for forgiveness. Committing myself to God, and this is the only way to break loose from my sins. 今天20多年以后，我依然可以从游戏中得到放松。当然，现在已经不是电脑游戏了，是手机游戏，但是它不再控制我。Today, 20-some odd years later, I still play games, not on the computer anymore, on the smartphone. I still get joy from it, but it doesn't control me like the way it used to. 亲爱的朋友们，或许你生活中所遇到的困难与我不同，但如果你有任何试图改变的、有很长时间又无法改变的习惯，那么我邀请你跟随主耶稣这位赦罪的神，依靠他来摆脱罪的捆绑，享受这份福气。Dear friends, perhaps what you are facing today is different from me. But if there are any old habits you've been trying to break for a long time, then may I invite you to learn more about this forgiving God. With his mighty hand, break away from the unbreakable. Thank you.
Amen to that. Hello, testing. Testing, thank you. Amen to that. Thank you, Boyang, for sharing your testimony. Very powerful. And now we're going to get into the second half of the workshop, which is about understanding children with e-addictions. And we're just going to wait until we can pull up the PowerPoint slide for you to view as well. For those joining us online, hello, welcome to the live stream. And my name is Michael, and in the first half of this PowerPoint, presentation, I will be sharing my testimony, and I will also be sharing a story and a model in which why online addictive behaviors are so enslaving and so easily able to be fallen into. Then Dr. Michael Perry will be talking about the medical, bio, psycho, and social models. There are 3 objectives for our PowerPoint. The first is to equip and exhort you as parents, if you're a ministry leader, to teach and equip you of how to approach those whom you are serving. And if you yourself are struggling through addictive online behaviors. So let me do a quick definition of e-addiction first. E-addiction is an overarching umbrella under which categorizes social media use or video game use. There could be gambling online, there could be pornography, there could be single-player mobile gaming or online gaming. And in this talk, we will be focusing primarily on gaming addictions. And this is a very interesting and contentious space because one, there you go, we see the PowerPoint. We can go on to the next slide, please. And actually, if we have a clicker, if I can have a clicker, please. Yes. So we'd like to approach e-addictions from a psychosocial, biopsychosocial perspective. Thank you. So this topic is very contentious and premature. There's a lot of new emergent research within the medical field, and it is also polarized because you have different specialists and doctors saying, hey, this is not actually an addiction. It's not a traditional substance you're consuming and it's affecting you. And others will also say, hey, this is my livelihood. It's significant too because it's affecting so many of us as parents of our children. It's affecting our loved ones within church communities, and it's extremely pervasive in that, let's say, a game like Fortnite would have 100 million active users, or an event on an online game is actually bigger than the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals combined. So we see that the World Health Organization back in 2018 actually coined the term gaming disorder. And in China, 10 years prior, they were categorizing gaming behaviors as an addiction. And so they were implementing strict macro policies, let's say no playing after 10. You can't make an account until you're 16. They're implementing policies to tackle gaming addiction. Now, the reason why this is a contention at the same time is because here in the West, all over the world actually, even in our school institutions, we have gaming hubs where we are sponsoring students and teams and paying them to play games professionally as a sport. So what is it then? Where do we draw the line and how does it affect us? It's a complex issue where we would categorize gaming behaviors as an addiction, but at the same time, it's a sport in which we are putting money into and within our actual academic institutions. So this year is a esports gaming studio at Durham College here in Ontario, the first of its kind, which is very fascinating, right? What is gaming addiction? This is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it is a pyramid of successive needs in which, as humans, we want to seek first the foundational physiological needs. So food, water, sleep, rest. And once we have those established, we're looking for safety, which is employment, a roof, a house over our heads. Then it is love and belonging. We want relationships, intimacy. And so once those are established, we're going higher in our order of our next need that we want. The next is esteem. We want to feel respected in our communities. We want to be known for some work. And finally, once those are met, we then seek out the highest order of our needs, which is self-actualization. We want to be satisfied and fulfilled with a vision or purpose in life. And these are all natural needs in which, from a biblical perspective, God has made each and every one of us to want these needs. We are needy as people. We do need to sleep and rest and have connection, social connection, intimacy. We need ultimately God at the top, because God is what truly gives us purpose and wholeness and fulfills our self-actualization needs. Now, within this talk, I want to implement how and why. Why is gaming or e-addictions, social media, so entrapping? And it's actually because it fulfills each and every one of these segments of our needs. Let's continue, I'll explain. There is a model, I'll be sharing my testimony as well. There's a model, it's the addiction triangle. And within this model, using these needs of the pyramid, I'll be explaining why it's so easily, you can fall so easily into this trap. So I also, just similarly to Po-Yang, thank you for sharing your testimony. I struggled a lot through my adolescent years. Similar to Po-Yang, I had loving parents involved in my early years. And I remember my mom taking me to different sporting activities, being present, taking me to piano, different kumons, and many different tutoring. I was a very good student in my early years, and I had stable, loving parents. But what happened over the years in which I began to struggle? I was a high school dropout because I used to play 80 hours a week of video games. And this was actually a process in my later childhood years into my early teen years that gradually got worse. I would play 1 hour a day to 2 hours a day, 3-4 hours a day. I would spend less time with other people. Church become more self-enclosed, away from people, and play more online. And this was a pattern, systemic behavior over time, in which would grow over the years. And so I have a picture up here of I've actually dropped or failed over 18 courses in high school. And even my first year in university, I really tried. I really tried to study again. But because of my tens and thousands of hours gaming, I actually was not able to read. I was not able to read. I would read half a page and I would forget what I read, and I had a lot of struggle just getting back into the academic study. And I had a 1.33 GPA, and that was me trying first year at university. I did so bad that the academic dean had to talk to me and say, hey, do you still want to study here? Because if you do, then you have to really get your act together, or else we will have to say bye-bye to you. We'll have to kick you out. So what happened? What happened? Over the years, I would grow into the systemic behavior of gaming, and it became severe. Now, the World Health Organization, Dr. Michael Perry, will be talking about the definition of gaming addiction, but I actually grew into that definition, you'll find, where I was preoccupied throughout my day, anticipating gaming. I would be at school and I would think about my games. I would think about wanting to level up, or wanting to play with a specific friend, or wanting to go back and play a certain level. I would be preoccupied in my mind. And this would be reinforced through repetition. I would lie and keep private, keep secret this life amongst my friends, peers, my parents. I wouldn't tell them that I'm actually going home and playing games, because partly I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know. And I would grow in this self-isolation over time. Another factor in my life was the gaming behaviors because it got so severe, similar to Poyang's story, it would affect other aspects of your life. It affects your familiar relationships. It would affect your physical health. For Poyang, he wasn't eating. He lost 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds. It was not sustainable. In fact, he would have died if he continued. For me, on the other hand, I gained weight and my mental health was deteriorating. I had no social connection. I wasn't working. I was failing school. I was lying to my parents. I was growing in this hate for myself. I struggled with my church, within church attendance. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to show up. And this is a gradual cycle that will grow. So going to this model of addictive behaviors, it's the triangle of addiction based on the testimonies of both Poyang and I. We see, this is important, I want you to note and really self-reflect. If you're a youth leader, or if you're a parent, or if you yourself, you're working through your own struggle with any online or e-addictive behaviors. You see, it's very easy to live through your behavior when there are a few factors, conditions met. And I call this the danger triangle, or the triangle of addiction. Let's say you're going through some stress, or you're feeling anxious, or you're feeling depressed and lonely. On top of that, you don't have an accountability social support system or social connection. You don't have someone saying, hey, how are you? You're not going to church on a weekly basis or attending a small group, or you're not seeing friends and seeing people. Let's say you're not working and seeing people face to face. There's no people really asking or keeping tabs on how you're doing. For Poyang, he was talking about how he was 5 hours away. When he first came to Canada, he had that time with no accountability. And so that was, in a sense, one of the elements in which it was so easy to continue and build this addictive behavior. And so if you're stressed, or you're going through anxiety, or you're feeling depressed, and then you have no accountability. And the third is you feel personal stagnation or spiritual stagnation. You don't feel driven or motivated. You're not engaged in meaningful work, or you're not challenging yourself to grow. You feel stagnant and you want to stay that way. Now, if these three factors are true and you're going through it, there are moments in life where you're going to be alone and you're going to have access, and this access is immediate. And that's when it's so easy to fall into these gaming addictive behaviors. So for me, nobody knew that I was playing 10 to 15 hours a day. So I had this anonymity. You're anonymous, you don't know. And if you look at games these days, it's so immediate. You just turn on the computer, or you pull out your phone. There's this accessibility, and it's also immediate. And the fourth factor of why this is so difficult for you to come out is that you can establish very intimate relationships with other people online. And you see, so many relationships now, people are getting to know each other through online, which is a good thing. It's a tool, it's a technology. But you have to realize that also, if you see yourself living a life that is unsustainable, that you don't want to live this life, being controlled or being mastered by the social media or the video game, you have to really dig deeper and know, why am I going back to the video games? Why am I going back to TikTok and Instagram, social media, Facebook, and always going back to those posts? Why am I spending 5-6 hours a day on the screen? And it's because you're actually establishing intimacy, love and belongingness, and a reputation for yourself online. And that's how it was for me in gaming. It's funny because I used to have a lot of conflict with my parents because I wanted to pursue a professional career through video gaming. I wanted to be a pro gamer. And that did not come true. But for me, that was my self-actualization. I was respected online, and I had a community online. And it would have been a means of financial gain as well. And so you see that when you're in moments of vulnerability, you're stressed or you have no accountability, and you feel like you don't want to go anywhere else in life. And you see that if in this gaming addictive behavior, you do have anonymity, you have access, and it's immediate, it's so easy to build an intimacy with your online behaviors. And that is what I want to suggest to you is when you are a youth leader or a parent speaking to your children, the gaming behavior is not necessarily because the game is fun, but it's because of other deeper needs or issues in which you need to address. It's not because the game is fun, but because maybe the child is running away or using it as a coping mechanism for something worse going on in their life, whether that be loneliness or stress and anger or pressure, peer pressure, or it could be anything that is deeper, and that's the root issue of what you want to target. I'd like to offer some very practical suggestions in which, when I reflect back in my life, I also worked for 5 years with young men, many of them playing online video games as a social worker, doing behavioral and rehab therapy. And based on my experiences with them, I see that I put together a few practical suggestions that you can do as a parent. And especially if your children are younger, you want to set guidelines. And make sure these guidelines you can negotiate with your children as they grow up. Because your children will challenge you and try to renegotiate. Now, it is easier when your children are younger. For example, you might want to have your computer or your iPad or whatever electronic it is in a public space. Have it in the living room. Don't allow them to have it within their own rooms, where you're creating that sense of anonymity and isolation, which are some of the factors in which gaming behaviors or addictive gaming behaviors can cultivate. There's a lot of research supporting the benefits of having at least 3 dinners a week, communally with your family all together. Many, with healthier nutrition, more positive mindset, to fight loneliness, to find community and accountability, just to ask your children, how was your day? Oh, this was my day. This is how my day was. It's very, very powerful. Have dinner communally with your children all together at least 3 times a week. Establish negotiables. Always converse with your children. Let's say every year you should renegotiate. Hey, how many hours do you want to play, or what time do you want to play? You always want to create a bit of margin too. If you don't want your children to play after 10, then set that time to 9 p.m. and always have that hour extra, because sometimes your children might actually go over 30, 40 minutes. Have that margin. If you are feeling upset after 10, then set it at 9. If your children are older, then what's more and more important is sharing your past failures. What qualifies you to teach, mentor, and bless your children is really just your past experiences and stories. You want to tell your children, hey, you're not in trouble. you're not in trouble. This is not based on your character. You don't want to attack the character of your children, but you want to encourage them. Because you are mandated to disciple your children. And that is not specifically just discipline, but it's discipline with love. You are mandated, if you're a Christian, to disciple your children towards Christ. And that is your first and foremost responsibility. And your children actually belong to God. And the way you treat them is an honor and respect and glory and obedience to Christ. Your children belong to the Lord more than they belong to you. So you want to disciple your children. The glory of children is their fathers. I'd like to suggest that children also look up to you as parents. They look up to you so much that if you were to say something negative about them, they can remember that for the rest of their lives. And I'd like to challenge you to be unconditionally proud to your children, not for anything they've done per se, but just for the fact that they are your children. We always say, I love you, but also say, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you because you are my child, you are my son. There are 3 things that your daughter should hear when they're growing up. It's, I love you, you are beautiful, and grow into a woman of wisdom. And 3 things your son should hear is, I love you, I am proud of you, and grow into a man of responsibility. And those are things that you want to emulate with your life as well. In the book Shepherding a Child's Heart by Paul Tripp, he talks about the differences between influence and control. When your children are young, you have a lot of control. Sleep at 8, brush your teeth now. You can't go out by yourself, no sleepovers. When they're older, you have to realize that it's more about influence rather than control. In a sense, parenting or micromanaging control is within the first 6 to 7 years. Once they hit around 7 to 12, 13, before they hit puberty, it's more about guidance. And you have to give your children a bit of freedom to make mistakes and learn. Now, once they're 14, teen years and beyond, it's more about influence and mentorship. And role modeling is so powerful. There was a research study surveying over 6,000 high school and university students, and they overwhelmingly still said, over 80%, that parents are the main factor of who they look up to in their lives as role models. Unbeknownst to us, the role models that we have in our lives, we actually become more like. And that is a factor of accountability that you want in your life. You want role models in your lives. If you are here struggling today, if you have loved ones who are struggling with addictive behaviors, I would like to suggest 2 strategies that you can use based on Richard Foster in his book called Prayer. And he talks about when you want to develop new habits coming out of other addictive behaviors, you want to use 2 elements, time and place. You want to use the place, the environment to help you with focus. So if you find that you're having difficulty with your studies, then find a place, a location, whether it be a library or your kitchen or a cafe, wherever it may be that you know that you study best, find that place. And the time helps you with consistency. What is the time of the day that you study best? Is it from 9 to 12? Or is it from 9 to 12 in the morning? Or 7 to 12 in the evening and night? Have a consistency in time. And so you want to use these elements to help you break out of behavioral habits that you want to come out of. Sometimes if you're unmotivated, you want to do other things in life. Movement creates opportunity for change and motivation. A lot of times the youth would say, I'm not motivated. I'm not motivated in life to do anything else. You might want to suggest, hey, try a part-time job, try a volunteer experience, try serving here at the church, try a new experience, because then you will learn more about yourself and you will find and create opportunities for motivation. Accountability is so important because in the act of sharing and confessing to each other, it's like, hey brother, I want to tell you something. I've been struggling with video game addiction, or I've been struggling with just being on my phone and just playing 10, 15 hours a day. I need your help. In the act of confessing, there's this level of humiliation that you have because you're being vulnerable to your other brother or sister. And at the same time, to the degree in which you are going through that vulnerability will be the degree of intimacy that you also gain. It is very powerful for you to confess with each other, confess with your parents. And as parents, you want to, without a judgmental or without an anger that will only further your relationship, you want to allow a space and an opportunity for you to have these conversations with your child, for your child to be able to just freely confess without you having to attack their character or further your relationship from your child. It's very powerful as well to meditate and memorize the Word of God. You cannot underestimate the power of God's Word and how transformative it can be. And that can be something that you can do before your studies. I want to share one thing from this slide here about the different thought systems, because before the presentation I was talking about how the differences of culture in which we have within Eastern and Western perspectives. And for many of us growing up within an Asian culture, we make decisions based on authority, based on the authority of our parents. Why am I doing this? It's because my parents said so. In the West here, we make decisions based on whether we prove it to be right. So we make decisions whether it be right or wrong, whereas in the West, it's based on who is authority, whereas in the East, it's based on authority. So if you don't obey authority, you're either going to be shamed, and if you do obey authority, you're going to be honored. So it's a shame-honor culture. Whereas in the West, you're proving something to be right or wrong. So I'm mentioning this because you're going to have conflicts with your children. And your children, not because they are bad or not because they don't like you, will challenge you and you'll have conflict just because the thought systems are very different. Your children will question you and question your authority and challenge it. And that's something that we have to understand. I don't think one culture is worse than the other. We just have to realize our thought systems are different, where one is an authority-based culture and the other one is a reason-based culture. And we should be mindful of that. I want to bring up Dr. Michael Perry now to explain the biopsychosocial model and medical perspectives regarding gaming addiction.
Well, thank you very much. The previous two speakers were excellent, and the testimonies that they're giving are very powerful. So I'm going to go on to my next slide here. Let's see. Okay. So I can't really see my monitor way back there, so I have something written here. So addiction is a chronic disease of brain, reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Dysfunction of these brain circuits leads to characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. So one of the things is to recognize how complicated it is. It's a very complicated thing. Addiction is not a simple thing. And this is a good talk because we're starting to recognize, or the experts are starting to recognize, that gaming is an addiction, but I'll explain that. This is reflected in an individual's pathological pursuing reward and relief by substance use, and in this case, gaming. Addiction is characterized by an inability to consistently abstain or not do the impairment of the behavioral tendency. So the person loses control, they have this craving, and they have diminished recognition of the significant problems with one's behavior and the interpersonal negative relationship sequelae or dysfunction. And then there's also an emotional dysfunction as well. Like other chronic diseases, addiction often involves cycles of relapse and then remission, but then the person goes back to the problem. And so it's not an easy thing. Now here is the books from the American Psychiatric Association that define mental illness according to the American Psychiatric Association. And they've called this the Bible of mental illness. I don't think that's a good way of describing it, but that's what it's called. And it's gone through a number of different editions, and now we have DSM-5. And that's a huge book, a huge system for defining mental illnesses. And so if you look at DSM, internet gaming disorder, it's, and here's a whole bunch of information about that here. It's currently not accepted as a full addictive mental illness, not yet, but it is being looked at as possibly a mental illness. However, DSM has recognized it as a possible future disorder of a mental disorder. And so these are the proposed symptoms of internet gaming disorder, very much like any addiction. Preoccupation with the gaming, as we heard, up to 10 hours a day. This is a huge preoccupation. Withdrawal when they're not playing the game. Low tolerance for not playing. Unsuccessful attempts to quit the gaming. Continued gaming even despite the problems, and deceiving family members and others about the behavior and the amount of time that the person is playing the game. And the use of gaming to relieve negative mood and maybe feel self-actualized, and a huge risk having to jeopardize even going to school or a job or a relationship. So obviously very dysfunctional. So I'm just going to go on. I just have one more slide or two more slides here. Now it looks like the World Health Organization and the psychiatrists in China are more advanced because they have recognized that gaming can be a disorder. I think I need to go on to the next slide here. I can't even see the slides up there, so I can't even tell if I'm on the right slide. I'm sorry. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, has defined a gaming disorder as a mental illness. So they're beyond the American Psychiatric Association. And so they define gaming disorder as a pattern of behavior characterized by impaired control over gaming, increasing priority given to gaming over other activities. What they mean is healthy activities, to the extent that the gaming takes precedence over other important interests and daily activities, including going to school and maybe to your job, and the continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. And so this is obviously very much like other addictions, like alcohol addiction or other substance abuse. The gaming disorder, to be diagnosed, the behavior pattern must be sufficiently severe. It doesn't mean you can't play games, and it could be even a few hours a day. But if it's very severe and it's interfering with the person's life in other ways, then it may be defined as a disorder. Okay. I'm just going to go back. I'm sorry, I can't see what the monitor is too far away. So to wrap up, this view of looking at this kind of addiction is called the biopsychosocial model. So addiction is not a simple thing. We used to think of it as a kind of substance. Alcohol would get into the system and control the person, but that's not the way it is. Obviously, it can be biological, but it can be social and psychological. So the biopsychosocial model of addictions is that there's elements of biology, including potentially a substance, but also elements of environment. And so in gaming, there's no substance, it's a game. But there's a way it takes control of the individual and leads to dysfunction. So thank you very much, and I'm going to stop there. Thank you. So Michael, are you going to join me, and we're going to answer some questions if there's questions?
We're going to open up this time for Q&A. And if you are joining online, if you have any questions you'd like to share, you can drop it in the comments. I do think we have a moderator who will let us know the questions. So if you have questions, if you're joining online, you can let us know through the comments.
And you can take away the slides as well.
For those of you who are present with us, do you have any questions for anyone?
Any questions?
Oh, question over here.
So if you have a child or student or young person you suspect that has an addiction problem, how do you start off the conversation? How do you approach?
That's a really good question. So the question was, if you have a young child and you suspect the addiction problem, how do you engage your child? How do you start the conversation? And this is, it changes depending on the age of the child and also the lifestyle. I think Dr. Perry, you have a lot of experience of this. So I'll let you go first and I'll go after.
Well, I really like what you're saying. You want to be very careful about how you start the conversation. And you certainly don't want to be too critical. But of course, it depends on the age of the child. And I think, Michael, you made that point very well. So depending on the age, depending on what they're doing, you may have to be very controlling if they're very young children. But as they get older, they value their independence, and if you come on too hard, you're going to actually make things worse. So of course, my own view is to look for other expertise. So talk to people who may have some knowledge in this area. People like Michael would be very helpful. So.
I think accountability is very important.
You want to come over?
Sure, I'll just go over.
Yeah.
So absolutely, accountability is essential. Sometimes as a parent, you have a very conflicted relationship with your child. So conversation just doesn't work. And I see that in pretty much, by the time I get to see clients or patients, it's gone to that point where there's a lot of fighting, sometimes physical fighting. It's quite traumatic situations. It's to the point where the conversation cannot be conducive. And in these situations, get communal professional help. And you want to spend more time listening to your child. I think that is the most important factor that as a parent, we will have to adjust and shift. And it's the hardest thing, especially if your child is an adult. It's just to be there present, to listen, to mentor, and to share your stories. It comes with being open and honest and confessing your shortfalls and shortcomings, and it's definitely a long process. Now, when it comes to points where just conversation is not conducive at all, and it's quite severe, maybe there's actual physical fighting, which is a reality that first, for the safety of everyone, sometimes you have to take a break from those conversations. And that also includes, as a parent, to fully submit to God and to prioritize this as one of the number one priorities in your life too, because as a parent, as a Christian parent, it is your duty, it is your calling to disciple your children in the Lord. And that is going to be a journey that you take together. It's a complex, it's not necessarily a specific rule book that you follow. For example, designing a car, there's a specific rule book and everything's by the theory, by the structure. But in terms of raising a child, it's so dynamic and different, and you don't necessarily do it alone. I think the right thing is getting support from professionals, from the church, and listening to your child and being there, just to listen and get to know. And it's going to be, it could take years. It could definitely take years, yes. Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Another question is basically to the parents, especially Asian parents. Gaming, they don't have a lot of clue, knowing what the child are playing. So from that perspective, like how would a parent understand, what a child is playing, or do they need to know in order to help or to understand the children?
Can I start that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think the first step would be to be curious and not to be condemning, and to actually maybe even be positive. There is some evidence that gaming increases intelligence. So we haven't talked about that part of it, that there is benefits from gaming as well, and we just don't have time. But that would be modest amount of gaming. Obviously, it can get out of control. But to be curious and to ask your child and be interested and look at the game and play with them. They're going to wipe you out, but because you won't be very good at it, and laugh about that, and so be positive about it. And so the thing is to accept it up to a point, but if it becomes a problem, that's when you have to do some intervention. But I think that be curious and even positive about it up to a point, not just wiping it out and just being simplistic about it.
There are so many games out there. I think we might think computer gaming is the most popular type of gaming, but it's actually mobile gaming that's more popular. And it's interesting where, for example, VR technology is an immersive technology that's grown 5 times over COVID. It went from a $5 billion industry to a $25 billion industry just in the US. And so with this, it's interesting to know that the most popular game on VR is just chatting, is just talking, connecting with people. I think it's important to know what they're playing because there's such a huge variety of games. It could be games on Facebook. It could be a very popular interconnected game that you play with other people, or it could be just a game that's single-playered. And regardless of what it is, I do think it is wise, though, because there are elements of gambling in many games. For example, there's like a pay-to-win. Some people put in thousands and thousands of dollars into gaming, so it's not necessarily a gaming addiction, but it's overarched with gambling. And the designers of these games know very well what they're doing, what's going on. It's like you're trying to make attractive games, an attractive community, and keep people on the games for as long as possible. So they're professionals at this. In social media, it's the same thing. So it is good to know what they are doing. Are they spending money, thousands of dollars? Who are they connecting with? What is the real reason that they're going back to the games? Because a lot of the times, I will say this, if every game in the world was single player and there was no scoreboard and there was no social connection, I don't think this would be a problem. The real issue is we're looking for social connection, and we're lonely, and maybe we're anxious or depressed. We're finding a coping mechanism. It goes a lot deeper than the game in and of itself. And so it is important to know what they're playing, because maybe there's other factors. Let's say there's money involved, which would make it a bit more amplified, and the reason why they are on. Maybe it's just to connect with people. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Thank you. There's another question online, is that how does social media addiction different or the same as gaming addiction?
It's very similar. Actually, there's a lot of emerging research about dopamine triggers with social media. Someone likes my post. I feel good about it. Someone is resharing my post. And it's interesting because my wife and I, actually for 10 years, 5 years full-time now for me, we actually work in social media. I work as a producer and in marketing. So we understand this side very well, where we are trying to create content that is attractive, that does garner people's attention and would retention. And so social media is very similar because you're connected to the whole world, everyone online. And there's research that in ways it can be just as addictive as substances, like cocaine. And there's a lot of emerging research out there, peer-reviewed by within medical journals, talking about how social media use and the novel experience in which we gain, or the feeling of excitement and just the reward circuitry in which we reinforce when we get like a like on one of our posts, those can be very addictive as well. There's also research within, every country. They do a survey of their own population, and like I think in the UK there was a study where adults within, I think Gen Z, older Gen Z to younger millennials, they can spend upwards to 8 hours a day just on their phone, just viewing, and a lot of it is just Facebook or scrolling, Instagram, TikTok, just scrolling down, and it's quite genius of these social media companies where they know they profile who you are, what you watch, what's the last 30 things you watched, what is it that you're going to want to watch next, and they keep you on the platform and try to keep you as long as possible because they're monetizing after that. They're making money out of that. So it is partly a realization of, hey, why am I on social media so much? Why am I spending 3 hours every single night just to try to find peace and rest, just scrolling through? And so yes, to answer the original question, it is very similar, very similar. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So the what's called the final common pathway, is the reward system in the brain. So the brain has a reward system that obviously natural things will affect, like food and water and sex and so on. These are natural. And then in a sense, unnatural things are drugs and alcohol and so on, but then gaming. But it doesn't have to be just gaming. It could be many different things, and it could activate the same system in the brain. And one of the things about addictions is sometimes it activates the brain 100 times more than the usual healthy things that, like normal food or regular food. And so that's one of the problems, is it takes over the reward system of the brain. And so it doesn't have to be a chemical, it could be a behavior. And so it's very similar. And addiction to gambling is another example. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I guess another question from a parent perspective is that now, with Michael and Dr. Michael Perry mentioned is, what is visible, right? Your phone, your computer. how would a parent prepare themselves? I mean, obviously kids will grow up to prepare themselves for the next emerging, the gaming thing, like you talk about, the virtual reality kind of thing. So how can a parent keep one step ahead to prepare themselves to handle the social media or the gaming situations?
Well, I guess one thing would be to have Michael come back and give maybe a whole series of talks. I think that being knowledgeable about this and maybe reading up about it and maybe talking to your kids more about it, and again, in a non-accusatory way. You want to learn what's going on so that you might be able to intervene later if you need to. But, having Michael come back, I think...
You're too generous. Let me say this as a general rule. The pace of change is faster than the pace of learning. So even as a parent, technology is changing so fast. If you just think back in 2007 was when the first smartphone, the first iPhone came out. It's only been 15 years, and now look what has happened. The pace of change is faster than the pace of learning. So you're bound to just make mistakes along the way. If you think about the disciples, the 12 disciples of Jesus, they spent 3 years together, 3 long years. What happened after 3 years? They ran away when Jesus was arrested. So even Jesus in person, I guess, even the disciples, they had Jesus, the source, in person, and they still struggled. So my main point as a parent is you're going to struggle and make many mistakes. It's going to be a journey with your child. And I do think it is sometimes recommended you join in the games with them. Be curious. Ask, hey, what is this? What's the scoreboard like? What are you playing this? Are you playing with your school friends? Who are you playing with? Oh, are you good? Like, why do you like this? And maybe try playing together. It's side-by-side time that you're having, and with your sons, you need side-by-side time. Then engaging meaningful activities with your children outside of electronics. And so over COVID, my wife and I, we have 3 kids, 3, 6, and 9. We actually volunteered every Saturday at a retreat center, and we were just doing farm work all day. And that was a time of meaningful activity together as a family, in which even though I immerse, like my wife and I, we immerse our kids in gaming to experience it. But our times together as a family are more meaningful. That if I call my children, hey, come have some dinner, then they'll drop it and we'll meet together. And so I don't think we should be villainizing technology in and of itself, because it's a tool. In fact, we're using technology right now. And we have to join in the process and create more meaningful activities and memories together with your children. So it's going to be a rocky process, but that's the journey that you have to take with your children. You have to be present and be there with them.
Okay, thank you. So there's another questions. What about the connection between e-addictions and pornography? There are many images and video on TikTok, on Instagram, and characters in games borders on softcore pornography. How should parents handle this?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist, not an addictions specialist, and so I won't be able to answer at the highest level of answer. But of course, one of the things that we can emphasize today is addictions have a sort of common brain area, and they all feed into that, and it's a reward system. So no matter what the addiction is, the approach would be fairly similar. So in other words, what happens is that certain things that can be positive in small amounts, like let's say coffee or alcohol in very small amounts, can be addictive. And what we're saying here is that gaming is not the problem itself. In fact, gaming, and I don't have the data here, can increase intelligence, reaction time, and so on. So there's some positives there. But if it gets to a point where it's taking over the individual's life, then it's an addiction. So now the connections between different kinds, and pornography is another example of an addictive behavior, that gets complicated, and I don't have the research behind me to not know that.
So interestingly, Dr. Michael Perry, he did present, we're using the DSM Diagnostic Statistic Manual, outlining addiction, and the only behavioral addiction outlined there is gambling. And we see that there's still a lot of emerging research when it comes to, is there pornography addiction? Is there gaming addiction? Then how about like a basketball addiction if you're playing 10 hours a day? Like, what's the difference between that? I think with pornography, it's different because sometimes the viewing, there are many other elements, and if it's combined with other sexual acts to gratify yourself, then you're creating a pattern behavior of viewing pornography, engaging in sexual acts, and creating like a reward circuitry that has repetition. And every time you're viewing pornography, you are triggering those dopamine reward levels so that you will continue to want to try to find new experiences, novel experiences that will continue to spike up these, oh, I want this to satisfy me. I want something more to satisfy me. I want something different. It is very similar to social media or gaming because there is research related to studying dopamine levels and pornography use, and why some people with these sexual addictions can be viewing hours and hours every day on end. And very similarly, it'll destroy different parts of your life. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not taking care of your relationships, your work. It affects all of life. So very similar to pornography use and how immediate it is, how accessible it is now, because you can just easily pull it up on your phone. It's instant. It's free. And so with all of this, it definitely makes it difficult to come out of because you're private. It's very private. You're secretive about it. So you're also practicing this anonymously, which is why, especially with an Asian culture, where it's a shame-honor culture, we don't want to confess and share. We keep like our video game or social media or pornography addictions secret, and that's what we have to kind of break out of. When you hear a brother or sister in Christ sharing about their child or even themselves struggling with something, the last thing you want to do is suddenly feel and say, oh my goodness, this person so-and-so said this and this. What you're actually doing is creating then a culture of separation within your church. You're not creating community. You're not fostering it. You're actually fostering isolation. If you're suddenly surprised that there's a sinner within the church, the church, in Sam Albury's book, Why Bother with Church? He writes that church is a place where sinners come together to worship. And you're going to be hurt in the church. It's just a reality when you have imperfect sinners gathering together, worshiping, fellowshipping, communally, just blessing each other, worshiping God. You're going to have rocky relationships. But what we need is when someone shares, not to suddenly feel shocked, oh my goodness, this person's daughter is going through this, but rather to support and pray. And because what they are doing and sharing is doing something very courageous. They're confessing. And if you are going to just gossip, you're actually creating isolation. So that's a very important note that within, let's say, an Asian cultural context, where everything is based on shame and honor, if someone shares something, you don't want to shame in any way. And that has to be very important, yes.
Well, Michael, that's a very good point. That, like, I'm a psychotherapist, and the first thing in psychotherapy, the first pillar of psychotherapy is not to be judgmental about the patient. We need to be open to hear what's going on. If you're judgmental, the patient won't come back for a second session. So if you want to help somebody, you have to be non-judgmental. You may be concerned and you may want to eventually intervene at some level, but you need to be non-judgmental if you want to help, because they'll just run away. They won't continue to talk to you if you're judgmental.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question, I guess probably more for Michael Park. How did your parent react to the drop in grade from your school from gaming addictions? How did their reactions help you or hurt you in addressing the issue?
So the question was, how did my parents react when I dropped out of high school?
Yep.
So I dropped out in grade 12, and it's because I was playing 10 hours from Monday to Friday. Saturday, Sunday, I'll play 15 hours. I'll pretend to go to school and come back. My parents were immigrant, hardworking parents, and they owned a convenience store. As Koreans, that's kind of like a running joke. And they didn't know. They didn't know I was coming back home and just playing games. And it was definitely gradual. There was a lot of discipline, like physical discipline. There was a lot of talks. There were many things. And if anything, when you get older, the physical discipline doesn't work anymore. It works when you're young. But when you're older, it only made me feel more like I wanted to take my own life. I didn't want to live anymore. And I thought a lot about just not wanting to live anymore because I felt worthless. I felt like the worst possible son. And I want to say this. I know I'm kind of going around the answer here, but there's something called Alcoholics Anonymous. It was made by, I think, Bill Wilson. Two Christians, about 100 years ago. And I want you, if you here are listening today and you are struggling with social media or gaming addiction, I want you to search this right now. Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a 12-step affirmation that I think works very powerfully even through your gaming addiction. So the very first step is realizing that you're powerless. I was powerless. I was playing 10, 15 hours a day. I was running from my own lack of self-worth and hate and lack of control and motivation, lack of friendship and meaningful connection. And even though I knew it was destroying my health, my family life, work, school, every aspect of my life, it was getting destroyed. I just kept playing more as a way of cope with that. And so the very first step is to acknowledge, I am powerless. I can't. God, I need your help. God, you exist. I need your help right now. And as you go through the steps, you'll realize that accountability, step 5, is there. You have to share with other people, whether that be your parents or friends, loved ones, church. It's like, hey, I'm going through this. I need to share. This is a part of my life that I've always kept hidden, and I need to break out. So my parents, we had a conversation. This was an interesting time because they were busy working every day, holidays. There was no break for them. My father came to the point where he said, hey, if you're going to live this life, then you will reap the consequences. I will let you live this life of gaming every day. But what you'll end up doing in the end is doing what I'm doing. And it's just working your days, and not and his sacrifice coming to Canada would have been meaningless. And so that was an impactful conversation. It was back in 2007, 2008. This was during the housing recession, so it was a tough time for my parents too, where we had to sell, move, and I wanted to live separately. And I realized that this time was a time when my life was not sustainable. Gaming all day I would become homeless, and that was just the reality. And so I had to learn through hardships, and it is like, definitely you reap what you sow. If you're gonna live a life of just gaming, then you're gonna sow the fruits of that lifestyle. There are consequences to what you do. And so you learn through the process. It was a process and a journey.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
So in my experience, I think my parents' reaction helped a lot. Like the doctors mentioned, if there are any sort of accusation, I already feel ashamed, right? So I would have just basically ran away and not to talk to them. My father, in a gentle way, at least this is what I remember. The conversation that we had was mostly around, he felt the regret that, when we were together at home, we did not have a conversation like this, such that, when I went away to school, I did not have anything to rely on, just focusing on the game. And in that conversation, I remember it wasn't a lot of words, just seeing him telling me how regretful he is. We never had the conversation, and I remember he even cried. So I guess in conclusion, basically, I was not pushed away. His reaction really helped me in that regard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there's one more question. What would you do if your kid started refusing to go to school and just wanted to stay on the computer all day or game all day like you did? When you were younger?
Well, I guess I'll answer that. Luckily, my daughter is 30 and not going to school anymore, and she didn't really get into gaming or any addiction, as far as I know. What would I have done? Well, I guess some of the things we've already said is I would turn to the experts. I wouldn't know what to do. I would have to do some homework, and as Michael said. Maybe even that won't work because things are changing so quickly. So I would seek out somebody like Michael, actually, and get some knowledge that I just don't have and may not even be able to find on the internet, amazing as it sounds. So that's what I would do.
So it's different depending on the age of the child. My 9-year-old son, I'm pretty sure he might have said a few times like, I don't want to go to school today. Or like my 6-year-old son might be like, I just want to play, or, it's different. You can easily talk about that and talk about responsibilities, talk about work. But if it's, I can understand how it can be more serious and different if your child is 20 and the past 10 years you've been drifting away in your intimacy and relationship with your son or daughter. And to converse would lead to conflict, and it's just we're not listening to each other, or you're not communicating in an effective way. It starts with the communication then. Work on the communication in ways that you can hear each other out. You might need a third party as well, if it always just leads to fighting in the first minute. I've had times when someone would throw a razor, whip it at their mother, and thankfully it missed and it dented the wall. It's like it's quite traumatizing. The issue then is not the gaming. It's like work on your relationship first. Work on your communication skills. And so, if your child is older, you have more. It's more about influence. You can't necessarily control. If your child is younger, you can easily say, I bought that, give it back. There's gonna be rules. When we come back home, no screen time from this time to that time. Why? Because I love you. Why? Because we're gonna spend family time together. Why? It's because we'll do this instead. And you converse. And it's easier when you're younger, but when you're older, you can still crack at the shell. And sometimes there are steps before you even get to talking about the gaming. Address your communication and understanding and listening. Try to listen out, and sometimes find different methods. If talking face-to-face doesn't work, do it through writing. Do it through a third party. Do it through like video recordings. Find different ways to communicate that works. And a lot of times that may not work too. Get help communally. Get help from friends and peers, and never diminish your child's character though. Because it is not necessarily about your child's character. If you are just saying, you're lazy, you're terrible, you're disobedient, you're the worst, like if you're saying these things, then you're only going to separate your relationship and further it apart.
Any questions in person or online? Online, there's a bit of a delay. So, any further questions? Okay. So if not, no, get up. So thank you, Michael Park. I'll get up here.
Sure.
Yeah. So if there's no further questions, I would like to thank you to all three speakers, Bo Yang, Michael Park, and Dr. Perry. Thank you for sharing with us your experience and your knowledge in this subject. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we have yet to learn, and hopefully the next time we can have a follow-up session maybe to go deep dive into some of this topic in here. So I'd like to, on behalf of all the participants, whether it's in person or online, I want to thank you again for your presence and your sharing with us.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So once again, we appreciate that you join us online or in person. We ask that you continue to work hard and to journey with your children in handling in this matter. Is not an easy task, as the three of them have shared. There's a lot of patience that required to walk with your child, or it could be an adult child. Gaming is not necessarily just a 3 years old or a 13 years old thing. It could be an adult that you may have to walk with them. So continue to walk with your children. And in closing, in the Bible, in Proverbs 3, verse 5, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. And in all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." And verse 7, "Do not be wise in your own eyes, and fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. And it will be healing to your body and a refreshment to your bone." So I hope that this short couple hours of the workshop will help you in some way. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to the church. Our website is ntcbc.org, whether you're in the English congregations or the Cantonese or the Mandarin, feel free to reach out to the church, and we'll be glad to connect with you. We do have worship services as well, so we welcome that you browse through the website and find out what is appropriate for you. So on behalf of all the organizers and the speakers, I would like to thank you again for joining us. Thank you. Was there last questions? I can't see it on my phone, so just give me a quick second. The last question. Oh, okay. We have. I have to read through in here. The last question is that I feel like social media is a real peer pressure. How do you talk to teenage daughter about fashion, popularity, makeup, and plastic surgery? Any takers? So we have the extensions of the Q&A period.
I could start.
Okay,
I could start. Yeah. So one of the things is to know something is to know what you don't know. And I'm a therapist who deals with adults. My youngest patients are probably 20. And so now, as a father, I do have a daughter, and I would just have to say something more generally, which is, again, when you have an issue and you think that she may be doing certain things that you don't like or you think are wrong, be careful, because of course things change in society, and I'm old and she was young, and so just because I don't think it's so great to wear makeup, things have changed so much. I think much younger people are wearing makeup, and so don't be too hard too hard, and learn more about it and talk to her. And then, of course, I've said this many times, talk to some professionals, try to get some more information, etc. And don't do something really quickly that could damage, and I think Michael said it, could damage the relationship fundamentally. So just be very careful.
Thank you for that, Michael. This question is not necessarily related to addiction, but more about just parenting your daughter to grow into someone with self-confidence and self-worth and just assurance in the Lord. Ultimately, is what every parent rather would hope for in their child and their daughter to grow up in the future. And so it is just being a loving, present family. I think if you're a father, then be loving to your spouse. If you're a mother, be loving to your spouse, and be present with your children. Talk with them, listen to them, and it's really a lifelong journey. I think with the peer pressure, it's going to be inevitable. You're going to have peer pressure in many ways, and you're going to go through stages of I guess building your self-confidence. I think if you want a healthy child to grow up well, there's like a level of a lot of affirmation and love, but also a good level of control and support. And so high acceptance and high control is a type of parenting that is called authoritative parenting. And you definitely don't want to be dismissive, which is low acceptance and low control. Like, just do whatever you want. Sure, whatever. Oh, okay, that's great. I don't really care. Are you telling me a story? Okay, I'm busy. Like, you don't want to have that narrative growing up. You don't want to be authoritarian, which is just control and low acceptance. It's like, what did you do? Why did you do this? You did this wrong. And not saying, I love you, I'm proud of you. You're like unconditionally. You also don't want to just be permissive and just be high acceptance and have no control. And that is, it is the love over time that you give to your child, and rather than addiction, it's more your presence and your continual involvement as the parent with your child to grow, for her to grow into a woman of self-value and wisdom, self-worth and confidence in Christ.
I just have one other thing to mention. According to Michael, and I totally agree, is it depends on the age of the child, the offspring. I do have a patient who's like, I think she's 78, and she's a grandmother, and she tries to control her daughters who are in their 30s and 40s. And she's in group therapy with me, and the group of other patients are telling her, you can't do that. And she says, but I'm the grandmother. And it's like, no, it's just the title. You don't get to tell your daughters how to parent their kids. It's not the right time, and you can't do that. So it depends on how old they are, of course.
Okay, thank you very much again. So with the delay, there's no other questions. So again, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
I think one of the analogy I would say as a parent, it's just like when you go on the airplane, when the oxygen mask come down, what is the first thing you need to do? It's not to put the oxygen mask on your kids, right, or younger children. Is to put it on yourself. So I think the first thing is, one thing is from a parenting perspective is we ourselves need to first to have that reflections before we get to our children. I think that will be a good baseline. So again, we will stop at this moment. So if you need to have a part 2 of the workshop or episode 2, we will let you know, and after some feedback from all the audience. So again, thank you very much, and have a good weekend. It's cold, put on your jacket, and enjoy the day. Thank you.
that was